Hello bookworms and welcome back to my channel. Not that long ago I made a video talking about my top 10 favourite standalone novels of all time, and I realised while creating that list that a lot of my favourite books are within series, and I just feel like it gives the series disservice to only recommend one of the books in the series. You really have to recommend it as a whole. So either you treat the book as a, in some cases, 10,000 page long book, or you treat it as it is, which is as a series. So I decided to create an entirely separate video talking about my top 10 favourite series. That's what this is. So if you haven't already, go back and watch my first video about my top 10 standalone novels, because that video does actually feature my favourite book of all time. But stick around to see what my favourite series are. Now this first series, some people might say that it's not a series because you can actually buy it in a complete bound edition. I do believe that it is a trilogy. Even though you can buy the complete bound edition, it's still a trilogy. And even in those bound editions, it's still separated into the 3 books. And that is The Lord of the Rings. Also, can we take a moment to appreciate these editions from like the 1980s, I think? I love how campy they are. I think these are my favourite editions of The Lord of the Rings that I have ever seen. I mean, look at that. Also, who remembers when books were $6.99? The Hobbit was definitely an introduction to fantasy literature for me, and I absolutely adored it as a child. But when I read The Fellowship of the Ring, the first book in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, I fell deeply in love with the fantasy genre. There is just something about this book where, let's be honest, if you've read the trilogy, not a lot of action takes place in this book. It doesn't have any battles. It really is a lot of setup. It's a lot of character introduction, but I just fell in love with the whole concept of setting up for a much larger story. And I think this is one of the things that this trilogy does so well, is that whole spending so much time in a place and with characters that you just absolutely fall in love with them. These are a classic series for a reason. I understand why people are intimidated by them, and I understand that they are not the most accessible books in the world, but I do highly recommend the Andy Serkis audiobooks of the trilogy and of The Hobbit. He does all of the voices like they are in the film. He obviously also does his famous Gollum voice. So if you are intimidated by these books but feel like you might enjoy them, pick up the Andy Serkis audiobooks, because oh my god, you will not be disappointed. The next series on my list is Her Majesty's Royal Coven, which is currently comprised of 2 books, but I believe is going to be a trilogy, and there is also a prequel novel that I haven't read. But Her Majesty's Royal Coven is about witches that are part of Her Majesty's Royal Coven, which is a coven of witches that work for the government. And the first book follows 4 witches. All of those characters were friends as youths, and it sort of discusses their relationship now that they're grown up, their relationship with HMRC. There's also a lot of commentary on the war on trans people that is currently happening in the media and in politics. I love these books. I think they are unafraid to take risks, especially with the ending of this book and also the ending of the second one. It's hard to describe. They kind of feel YA but with adult themes. Really digestible, but they also cover topics and characters that are not within the YA category, because these are women that are in their 30s, not teenagers. And I'm really excited for the 3rd book to come out, and also I love the colorways of these books. Some of these books are getting harder to hold as well as the microphone. The next series I want to talk about is a completed trilogy, and it is the Bone Witch trilogy by Rin Chupeco. This is the gorgeous Illumicrate edition. It follows a bone witch. So this is a witch that can raise beings from the dead. It has been a while since I read the series, but from what I can remember, there are witches, or archers as they're known in this world, who each have powers that join 2 different elements. So you've got like the wind, fire, water. Tia, our protagonist, is a bone witch, so she can control the dead. This trilogy is told in a dual perspective and also dual time. So we see the story from Tia's perspective following her journey chronologically from her beginnings, finding out that she is a bone witch when she accidentally raises her brother from the dead. Also from the perspective of a character called Bard, who in Tia's timeline is in the future, and it sort of switches between the times, slowly figure out what's happened and how Tia has gotten to become basically a villain. It says on the back of the first book, "Let me be clear, I never intended to raise my brother from his grave, though he may claim otherwise. If there's anything I've learnt from him over the years since, it's that the dead hide truths as well as the living." It's my kind of witchy book. I love a witchy book, but I also love a rare power witchy book. I just loved seeing baby Tia at the beginning of the book from her perspective, and then also seeing badass, in control of her powers, Tia from Bard's perspective. I loved all 3 books. Each book got better each time. I think it's a criminally underrated series. This next one I'm not going to hold up because it's in a box set right there, and it is the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. The Lunar Chronicles is a series of 4 books and 1 prequel and 1 short story collection, and it follows 4 characters that have been reimagined from 4 fairy tales, but in a like sci-fi Star Wars type setting. If you're anything like my girlfriend who loves sci-fi, you will say that Star Wars is not sci-fi, but is in fact a fantasy set in space. And I would say that the Lunar Chronicles gives that similar vibe. However, like Star Wars, there are androids and space travel, but it definitely feels more fantasy than I would say sci-fi, even though technically it does fit in the sci-fi category. I love this series. I read it a couple of years ago now via the audiobooks, and when I tell you I did not sleep for days because I just kept listening. I could not stop. I just couldn't put them down. The introduction of the characters is done really well. I think I was a little bit worried that because it seems as if you're gonna follow all 4 characters separately from each book, but actually the first book feels like a solitary 1-person narrative, but then it sort of builds with each book, and then in the 4th and final book in the series, all 4 characters come together. And then there's also a prequel which has the sort of villain origin story, and then there's a short story collection as well which has some of the characters from the original appear. I think the prequel and the short story are a nice sort of add-on if you're a fan of the series, but definitely the 4 main books in the series are what I'm talking about. But I just think this was a really, really enjoyable series. I liked how it riffed off of original fairy tales with this sort of sci-fi twist. I will say it was written a few years ago now, and it's very straight, very heterosexual. That is something to be aware of. I love this box set. I think it's beautiful because these are the original UK covers. I don't know if it's different in other countries, but this is the UK cover for Cinder. I mean, it's alright, but this is the cover I have, and that's good. This next series, again, I'm not going to physically hold because you can't even see because they're out of shot, but all of the novels in the series are on my top shelf, which I cannot reach without standing on a chair, and there's also quite a lot of them. It is the Grishaverse by Leigh Bardugo, and the Grishaverse is a little bit of a complicated series because it's many different collections of series together. So within the Grishaverse you have Shadow and Bone, which is a trilogy. You then have the Six of Crows duology, then have the King of Scars duology. Now, a lot of people will say that you can read Six of Crows without reading Shadow and Bone. I'm not entirely sure if that's true, because really there is a through line, there is linking characters, there is linking plot, there's a lot of world building that happens in the Shadow and Bone trilogy that you miss out on if you don't read it, so things won't make sense if you go straight into Six of Crows. The complication of the Grishaverse aside, I think that the Grishaverse is a brilliant YA fantasy. The amount of world building involved over the 7 books is incredible. The character work, I do think that the Six of Crows duology is the strongest out of all of the collections of books. There's a lot of criticism of the Shadow and Bone series, and we are following a 17-year-old in that series, and it's first-person narrative, whereas Six of Crows and King of Scars are not first person. I do get some of the criticism for the Shadow and Bone trilogy, but I adored it when I read it, and I read it as an adult. So I don't even have any nostalgia clouding my vision, but I really did enjoy the Shadow and Bone trilogy. And I think if you're gonna keep me invested for 7 books, then you're doing a good job. The Grishaverse was actually a series that I got into when I first started my BookTok and BookTube and all that stuff back in 2021. I really fell in love with the series then, and I spent my lockdown basically binging the entire 7-book series. I loved the community aspect of it when the 7th book came out, Rule of Wolves, and everyone was really excited about it and excited to see the conclusion of this really long series. For the time being, we don't know if there's going to be any more in the series. There might be a new Six of Crows book. It just reminds me of a time where I felt really a part of something. As much as the pandemic was very unusual, strange, and quite scary and sad time, there was also a lot of good that came out of it, and I think for me, this channel is one of those things. You'll notice a theme. I really do enjoy a YA series, and the next series is also YA, and it's probably one of the most famous YA series to ever have been published, and it's The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This is the first book, The Hunger Games. It is a trilogy. There's also the prequel, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and the new prequel, Sunrise on the Reaping, which is coming out in 2025. I'm so excited. We get to see Haymitch's Games, the second Quarter Quell. Oh my goodness. Like many teenagers from the time that The Hunger Games was coming out, I was obsessed with this series. I heard my friends talking about this book, and then there was a movie coming out that was based on the book, and that it was brilliant. I remember having a friend who refused to tell me anything about the series or the film until I read it. I decided to pick it up. At that point, I had exclusively been reading through audiobooks, but I decided to pick up the physical books, which was something that I never really did because I was very intimidated by physical books because of my dyslexia. But I picked up the physical books and I zoomed through them. Like, I have never read a series as quick as I read the entire Hunger Games trilogy when I was 14. There's just something magical about this series, the way that you connect to Katniss as a main protagonist. I think books like this are really important because it's a way for teenagers to understand some of the complexities of war and political corruption through stories like this. Also, Katniss is 100% autistic. I don't know if Suzanne Collins intended for her to be an autistic character, but as an autistic, I can tell you that Katniss is one of us. I felt a kinship with Katniss when I read this at 14, although she's braver than me. She is braver than me volunteering for The Hunger Games. I just think this is a classic, and it still holds up all these years later, and I cannot wait for the next book. The next series, I'm kind of calling myself out with this one because technically I haven't finished it yet, even though all 3 are out and have been published, but I can't not include this series just because of how special it has become to me and what a kind of incredible chapter in my life it was. It's Twin Crowns by Catherine Webber and Catherine Doyle. This is the proof copy. This is one of my prized possessions. I do own both the Wren and the Rose arc. I feel very lucky to own both. I didn't realise when I got sent both of them in the post that they would become such a big part of my bookish experience. But I got the proof of this book a couple of years ago. I actually did a little campaign for the publication of the book, so I read it early. I fell in love with it. I was really excited to work on the campaign, and it turned out that it was written by 2 of the nicest people I have ever met, Katie and Kat, who just so happened to be sisters-in-law. And then when the second book was coming out, Cursed Crowns, they put a call out to be on the street team, and I jumped at the chance and I joined the street team for that. I went to the launch party, which was a ball. I had already met Katie before. I met Katie at Bookfest a few months before, and she'd actually recognised me from the content that I'd made about the books. But I then met Kat as well at the launch for Cursed Crowns, and it was just one of the best nights and one of the best bookish events I've ever been to. And I was also part of the street team for the last book, Burning Crowns, which I am currently reading. It was a bit of a delay with me getting to it because of university, but I am reading it. I'm loving it. Just being part of the journey of these books has been incredible. Like I said, Kat and Katie are just They're sweet as people. They've created such a beautiful and accessible world. One of the things I love so much about Twin Crowns and the trilogy as a whole is just how accessible they are. I may be surrounded by books, but I am also dyslexic, so sometimes I do struggle, and I've never had an issue with these books. I just find them so easy and such escapism, and they came to me at a time where I really, really needed that. And that's why they're on this list, and that is why they are really special to me. And I'm very grateful that these two twins came into my life. But Twin Crowns, if you're interested in reading it, is about two twins. One is a witch and one is a princess who is about to take the throne of her kingdom and become queen, and they are switched places. Wren, the witch, takes on Rose's role, and Rose, the princess, is kidnapped and taken away to the Coven by the coast. So basically it's the Parent Trap, but with witches and princesses. And if that doesn't convince you to read it, then I can't help you. My penultimate favourite series has, again, come with a bit of a story. I picked this book up, the first book in the trilogy. Spoiler alert, it is a trilogy. Again, during lockdown, and I had found this new genre of urban witchy YA fantasy, and I just absolutely fell in love with this kind of book. And then I saw this book about a teenage girl that found a deck of tarot cards, and I was like, that sounds like something I'm going to enjoy. So I picked it up, I read it, I fell in love with it. I was like, this is a new favourite. I just knew as soon as I started reading it that it was going to be a new favourite of mine. And it's All Our Hidden Gifts by Caroline O'Donoghue. And this is a trilogy, so this is the first book in a finished trilogy. And the next book came out, I loved it. And the third book came out, and I was invited to Walker, who published these books, their launch for their new YA imprint and a new sort of creator circle that they'd created. And I think it was last December 2022, I believe, was when I was invited to Walker YA's like launch party, and Caroline was going to be there. The final book in the trilogy was coming out, and I was really excited to meet Caroline, and she recognized me. She had seen me talking about this book online, and yeah, it was crazy. It was the second time that had happened to me, that an author had recognized me because I was saying nice things about their book. And this copy, signed edition, and it says, "Thank you so much for your support." I just love it when you get to experience community in real life and real time at these events, and that was one of those experiences where I was like, wow, people listen to what I say, and that includes the authors of the books. This is the kind of YA that I would have absolutely loved as a teen. I mean, the fact that I loved it as an adult says it all. But this is the kind of YA that I could have done with as a teen. Not only does it have like witchy vibes and all that good stuff, but it also has queer characters and like relationships that don't necessarily look like you might expect. I just think that the queer representation is handled so well in this book, and you can tell that Caroline has done her research. She has employed those sensitivity readers. I really appreciate that, and I think that this is the kind of YA that we need, a solid urban fantasy witchy YA trilogy. And the final series on this list should come as no surprise to anyone if you have been around for a while, and even if you haven't been around for a while, I feel like I talk about it enough that you should know what this series is going to be. It's the Bone Season series by Samantha Shannon. Now this copy right here is not the correct copy, this is the old version, but it's also very special to me because it is signed and personalized, and it also has Samantha's old signature because she's actually changed her signature now. So that's why I've got it with me, but the new covers actually look like this. And I do own every single edition of the Bone Season that I possibly could own, but I can't carry them all, and they're over there. If you watch my bookshelf reorganization video, you can see all of my Samantha Shannon books. This is just the one that I'm holding as a prop. The Bone Season series by Samantha Shannon. 4 books currently published, 7 to be published. It's about a legal clairvoyant living in a dystopian, futuristic London where clairvoyance is illegal. It's a Prometheus and Pandora retelling, as well as a Orpheus and Eurydice retelling. It's one that you can't really talk about properly because I don't want to spoil anything. If you love a urban fantasy, if you love dystopian, if you love the epic worlds that come with fantasy novels, but you want to see that translated to dystopian fiction, then you should read The Bone Season. If you love character growth and a female lead, you should read The Bone Season. If you love queer characters, like literally everyone is gay, it's a homonormative society, read The Bone Season. If you love, I don't like describing it as this, but if you love enemies to lovers, then you should read The Bone Season. And if you love clairvoyance, tarot, kind of like real life witchy vibes, spirits, ghosts, you should read The Bone Season. Characters, the world building, the magic system, if you could even call it magic system, it's kind of like the spirit system, I guess. 7 orders of clairvoyance, all of the different kinds of clairvoyance, the language of flowers that is used, just heartbreaking things that the main character has to go through, the character development, the fact that all 4 books that are currently out are set over like a year. She ages from 19 to 20 in those books, but oh my god, does she go through a lot. These books aren't an easy read. They are tense, and they are gory, and they are heartbreaking, but they're so good. I genuinely cannot speak highly enough of these books. I have read the revised edition of The Bone Season. I was very lucky to receive a proof of the new revised edition of The Bone Season, so I have read that. I'm currently rereading it via the audiobook because I love the audiobooks of this series, so I'm interested to see how the audiobooks are a little bit different. I am then going to go on and read the rest of the series that has been revised so far. I cannot wait for The Dark Mirror, which comes out in February 2025. I've waited so long for that book. Oh my god, The Mask Falling came out in January 2021. I've waited a very long time for The Dark Mirror. And I also, if you can't tell by this copy, I have been reading this series since it came out 10 years ago. I have waited many years between each installment with bated breath, and I will never stop spouting the gospel of The Bone Season. I will never stop telling you to read it because you should read it. And I will be that annoying person that when it gets really, really successful, that goes, I was there at the beginning. I read it when it first came out, because I'm already that person. And when it gets its TV show, which it inevitably will, again, I will be that annoying person that was like, I read the book when it first came out. I'm desperately trying to convince my girlfriend to read the series because I love it so much. I don't know whether she will. She's quite particular in her taste. Your task in the comments is to convince my girlfriend to read The Bone Season. Maybe I have to get Samantha Shannon to convince her. So, there we have it. Those are my top 10 series of all time. That is in no particular order. I just wrote a list and followed the list. Although I will say that The Bone Season is my favourite series of all time. No questions asked. But if you haven't seen it already, you should go back and watch my top 10 standalone video. That will give you a bit of a wider range of my taste, because that does include some other sort of contemporary novels, whereas this was very, very fantasy heavy. But again, that's kind of the nature of series. Fantasy as a genre lends itself more to long form storytelling, so you tend to get them over more books. Let me know your favourite series in the comments, and also let me know if you've read The Bone Season. I need to find some more Bone Season fans. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. And thank you very much for watching. Happy reading!